All right. Well, I think we'll get going now. Thank you all for joining us. Good to see, well, sort of virtually see everybody. This is the last talk in our regional climate resilience and mitigation series for this fall. I'm glad several of you have joined in for the whole series. It's great to see everybody. All of these have been recorded. I've sent these out when I sent out the announcement for the next one, but if anybody is looking for the links for any of the talks from the series, just send me an email. My email is jimgowel, JIMGAWEL @uw.edu, and be happy to send those to you. We don't have a permanent place where we have all those available yet on the website, so we will soon. Our speaker, we will have our talk and then again, question and answer by chat. Please, you can put your questions in at any time and then we'll just field those at the end and I will feed them to our speaker and you can play Stump the Speaker with sustainability questions to your heart's content. Without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker today. Thank you to Ryan Dix for joining us. He is the head of sustainable resources at Pierce County. His team works on solid waste, environmental education, and implementing the new Sustainability 2030 plan that calls for a 45% greenhouse gas reduction by the end of 2030. Ryan has worked at Pierce County since 2009, serving as the first county sustainability manager. In his free time, Ryan is a passionate nature photographer. He's even got, if you want to look for him at airwaterland.com, shameless plug, and spends most of his time going to his kids' sports and arts events. Ryan lives in Tacoma with his partner and 2 kids. Thank you very much, Ryan, for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Ryan Dix. I work for Pierce County. I started at the county in 2009, which is sort of amazing to me. I was thinking that when I started sustainability work, LED light bulbs were $30 just for a single light bulb. And there were really no electric cars. That I think Tesla had created the Roadster, but we were thinking that we were excited about the potential of a Nissan Leaf coming out. And the county did, about 2 years later, purchase our first 3 electric Leafs anyway. So wanted to give you a little bit of background on my presentation today. I'm going to try to be pretty quick and then take questions at the end. I will not really focus on Sustainability 2030 and our new plan, which we are very excited about, but I'm happy to talk at the end about it and take questions. So holistic sustainability, I wanted to kind of give you an overview of sort of where my head's at and what's keeping me up at night, and you know what I'm also excited about, because climate change work is stressful and it's hard to deal with all the time, but I think we need to keep telling each other the stories that we see on a daily basis. So I'm gonna see if I can get there. So here, climate change obviously threatens everything we care about. So if you all take a minute to consider what you care about, it's pretty quick to see how climate change could affect it, whether it be your kids, whether it be wildlife, whether it be just everyday stuff. You like to go to the movies. Well, climate change could affect that, right? Like, so given that sort of background, I think it's important that we ask ourselves, well, who is responsible for climate change? And short answer, over the last 170 years of CO2 emissions, the answer really is developed countries, whether it be the United States, Europe, UK, and other developed nations. Up till about 1970s, 80s, almost all of those emissions were coming from a handful of countries. You can see that since the 80s, basically in the 70s and 80s, the rest of the world has caught up. But what's important to recognize is which countries are responsible for CO2 emissions. The rich countries make up about 12% of the overall population, but are 50% of the overall emissions. And so when you have these you follow international climate talks, there's a lot of talk about the fact that the United States and Europe have created this problem and are responsible for most of it. And yet now we're all saying we got to stop emissions, and other countries are saying, well, wait a minute, you've had your moment. When do we get ours? So there's certainly an equity issue here, but I think everyone realizes we have to reduce emissions. It's just sort of a question sometimes of who will pay. In terms of who are our top emitters since 1988, it's pretty clear who those are. They're fossil fuel companies. And there's a list, you can get this through The Guardian, it's a list of the top 100 fossil fuel companies that have emitted. So we know where most of the problems coming from. If we look at who are the biggest emitters in 2020, obviously China has overtaken the United States as the largest emitter, but on a per person basis, they're still significantly about half of where the United States is. You can see that we continue to put out a ton of emissions on a per person basis. And to be a little bit more specific about that, and I think it's important, is not everyone is putting out a lot of greenhouse gases in their daily lifestyles. Really, if you look here, this is the top 10% of US. If you just take the richest 10% of people in America, their average footprint is about 50, whereas the bottom 50% is really around 8. So there's just a significant, the more money you have, the more greenhouse gases you're creating, the more you're emitting. And if you took probably the top 1%, it would be way higher than 50. It'd be probably astronomically higher than 50. So this is an equality issue, an income equality issue. And we are in the United States way further out there than other countries. So I don't want to be all negative today. There has been progress on climate. It's not nearly enough, as this headline says. We have done, and COVID played a role in this, but we have sort of flattened emissions worldwide. Our current policies have us slowly declining in emissions. We have pledges to do more than that, but the sort of the 1.5 at the bottom here in kind of green blue, that's where we actually need to be. And because we've delayed reducing emissions for so long, this curve becomes steeper every year we continue to delay. So some success is happening worldwide. It's just not at the pace it needs to be to stay at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So I like to tell people about the Keeling curve. It's basically a measurement of CO2 in the air. I was born, I won't tell you what year, but you can take a guess. I was born around 331 parts per million. Today, we're up to 415 parts per million. And so this measures how much CO2 is in the air. It's a good way to measure whether we're having success in reducing worldwide. So far, the answer is not great because that continues to go up. And CO2 will remain in the atmosphere for at least 100 years. There are other greenhouse gases, but the major other one that is talked about is methane, which makes up about 16%. Methane is really a problem, but it only stays in the atmosphere for 10 years. So right now there's a big push to try to capture methane and reduce that 16% dramatically, because we'll see those benefits sooner than we will reducing CO2. So where are local greenhouse gas emissions coming from? So this is something that most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but we actually have a greenhouse gas inventory from 2015 that was put together by the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, and we're in the process of the county of updating this to look at 2019. So we'll have some newer information. As I mentioned at the front, the county is looking to reduce greenhouse gases by 45% by 2030. So that's really like 9 years away, and we're about to get to a new year. This is coming quick. So if we spend all our time on agriculture or wastewater, even solid waste, we're not going to get anywhere near a 45% greenhouse gas reduction. So I think what this slide makes clear is that we need to focus on road vehicles, which is just transportation in general. And we need to focus on the built environment, commercial built, and industrial built. So if you take those sort of 4 sectors, which are our buildings, our homes, our businesses, and then all of transportation, there's really only one way to reduce in those areas. And that's to basically move all of our electricity to clean electricity, and move all of our, over time, move all of our vehicles to electric, and all of our homes to electric, removing natural gas, reducing natural gas use dramatically. And so that's the sort of the hip solution right now, is we need to electrify everything. And because in this county, we have a lot of hydropower, it is more possible to consider this sooner rather than later. So if I jump to the next slide, this just gives a little bit more information about greenhouse gas emissions by county. So many of us were surprised when this came out to realize that the average greenhouse gas emissions of a Pierce County person is lower than King County. King County is up at 9.9. Snohomish County is at 6.3. We're at 8.2. And Kitsap is at 9.5. Now, if you dig in a little bit here, obviously King County is a much larger county, so they're going to have more emissions. That's the height here. But if we go to the next slide, we can look at sort of where the emissions are coming from. I want to start with Snohomish County. So you see that almost over half of their emissions are coming from transportation. And the reason that is because they have 100% clean energy in Snohomish County. Their electricity, I should say, their electricity is 100% clean. Snowpud Utility provides electricity to the whole county, and they're the only provider of electricity. So yes, they have natural gas coming for heating and other things to some of their buildings, but all of their electricity is coming from a clean source. So that's why their blue section, which are their buildings, their homes, their industry, is a much smaller section, because most of that is running on clean electricity. Now in King County, they have obviously City of Seattle has 100% clean electricity, but a large portion of the area outside of City of Seattle, their utility is Puget Sound Energy, which gets about half of their electricity from natural gas and coal. So their blue area, which are the buildings, is much bigger, because they're running on electricity that comes from fossil fuels. So for them, they've got to focus on their buildings first and foremost, and transportation, not secondarily, but as well. For the Pierce County, we're primarily, obviously, we have, I think, 7 or 8 electric utilities. All but one are 100% basically hydropower, solar, and wind, including Tacoma Public Utilities. So we have clean electricity in Tacoma, which is great news. We also, though, have a section of the county where Puget Sound Energy is providing electricity. And that section, like the same could be said for like a Bellevue, there the electricity that's coming to your house is coming from half about fossil fuels. So the bottom line here for Pierce County is transportation is critical, but we also have got to reduce natural gas use and get our electricity providers to start providing closer to 100% electricity over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. Kitsap County, I won't spend a lot of time here, but Puget Sound Energy is the electricity provider for almost all that county, and that's why their greenhouse gas emissions per person are higher. So a lot of information there. Hopefully that all makes sense. So there's a lot of work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45%. And I think it's important to think about, why do we want to do that? Well, I think it's important to ask the question, what climate impacts should we expect locally, and sort of understand them a little bit, so that it gives us more reason to want to do all this greenhouse gas reduction work. So this is a picture out on Ruston Way. This is right next to the Ram. This is sea level rise picture here. We get king tides in the winter primarily, and a lot of them have caused minor flooding on Ruston Way, just as an example. The good news for Pierce County is that a lot of our land is sort of high bank around Puget Sound. We do have lowlands though, and those lowlands are areas like Ruston Way, and really the Port of Tacoma is the primary area that is low lying. And I think when sea level rise is considered, you're thinking it's going to be 5 to 16 inches in the next 10 to 15 years. That will have a major effect on the Port of Tacoma. And we have a lot of pollution down there already that might get sort of re-brought up. So sea level rise, certainly a major concern for us. Extreme heat this summer. I took this picture that day. It was like 108 degrees in Tacoma. Extreme heat is something new for us. It is becoming the norm. And one of the things that's important to understand about like kind of our rain cycle is that we don't expect to get hardly any rain in the summer. And so all of it, we're going to get about the same amount of rain, but it's going to almost all occur between October and like March. And so if you think back to the last few summers when we've had smoke storms, other things, we're having extreme heat, but we're also getting no rain. And that is kind of a scary combination. And one that, obviously will lead to forest fires and smoke. Historically, Western Washington has not had very infrequent forest fires. And until I think 2015, we hadn't had the sort of smoke storms that we now kind of have annually. So one of the wild things about having done this work for a few years is we didn't know that we had to be concerned about forest fire smoke at the level that we are today. When I started, that was not a topic of consideration. People were concerned about forest fires for sure, especially in California and places like that, but they were not concerned about the smoke events that we've witnessed here. So forest fires and smoke continue to be a concern. I think we all likely got a mask for our first time before COVID because of these sorts of events. Ocean acidification, you guys had a presentation on ocean acidification. It's sort of my least favorite of our climate impacts because if carbon emissions remain unchecked, things that need to grow shells that live in the water aren't going to be able to grow shells. And that usually starts at the bottom of the sort of the plankton, and obviously clams and oysters have been affected in places like Hood Canal and in Puget Sound. But if ocean acidification continues at the rate it's been continuing, because about 40% of our emissions end up in the saltwater, we're not going to have marine life beyond things like jellyfish. And so that's obviously something I care about. I think the biggest threat to salmon and orcas and seals and everything else, I think, is climate change. And so that's a great reason to try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the short term just by itself. Extreme precipitation. Well, we've all sort of lived through this in the last few months. We don't, like I said, we're getting almost no rain in the summer, and then we get into like a rainy monsoon season. We're going to get stronger storms with climate change. We know that. We're getting more of these events where it used to be in the Pacific Northwest, you got a lot of just mist. You got a lot of just, well, it's always raining, but it wasn't like a lot of rain. And now we're getting what I would call more East Coast events, where you're getting over an inch of rain 10 to 20 times a year now. And that is not how it used to be. For the first time, I think it was back in like 2017, Tacoma had 10 days over an inch of rain. So that's new to this area. And it causes issues because we care about Puget Sound, and it creates a lot more stormwater heading into our lakes, rivers, and streams. Obviously, when you get stronger, bigger rainstorms, you also get things like landslides. Here's a picture of a landslide over in Gig Harbor. A lot of our, areas are landslide is a real threat, and so mainly we have little ones that will take out a road or do something like that. But as we all learned years ago, they can also be very deadly. So we're going to get more landslides. Sedimentation, as the Mount Rainier, we have that unique thing having Mount Rainier up at the the top of the county. And when ice and snow melts and you have glaciers retreating, it leaves a lot of rocks to come down our rivers. And these rocks will take, depending on which way they go off of Mount Rainier, they can take between 50 and 120 years to get down to what I would call the port of Tacoma. And so these rocks are all moving and they're moving downriver. What we have is just a ton of rocks coming off the mountain. And parts of the Puyallup River are 5 feet higher than they were just 20 or 30 years ago. And so that creates a big problem because you're not able to move them. And even if you could move them, they just would move back in literally days. So we're not going to be able to kind of manhandle the rocks. And you're also not allowed to because it's where salmon lay their eggs. So there's a lot of issues here, but what it all adds up to is more flooding. And here's a picture in the Puyallup area, right off the levee of the Puyallup River. Flooding is going to be a bigger problem for Pierce County. We are spending a lot of money and doing a lot of really great work to reduce flooding and to give the river more areas to go, more places to go. We've for a long time tried to constrain our rivers, and that is not going to be an effective solution. And climate change will only make flooding worse. So all those bad things that are happening or not great situations kind of bring me back to sustainability. And so to me, sustainability is the answer to minimizing climate change impacts. But one thing I think we all need to come to grips with is that sustainability solutions must be equitable. We can't continue to do things the way we used to do them. When we create new actions in our Sustainability 2030 plan, we're running them through an equity assessment to gauge who's gaining from this, who's getting maybe a negative benefit from this, and make sure that it's fair. So, I read this a while back, and it's like the same people responsible for climate change are responsible for inequality. And you got to sit with that one for a while, but it just remains true. And so we can't create new solutions and create worse inequality. The new solutions we create have to make equality better. They have to improve people's lives generally. And so that's really, I think, a key focus of the county's work, and I know the city's work as well, is we need to make sure that the actions we're going to take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are equitably felt throughout the entire county and throughout the entire region. So obviously, any sustainability action must work in coordination with local tribes on all climate actions. We are trying to do more outreach with the tribes, more work with them. They're critical to anything we do moving forward. And I'm heartened that they're hiring a sustainability coordinator, and we're obviously super excited to continue to work with the Puyallup tribe, Nisqually tribe, Squaxin, and Muckleshoots. It's the kind of work that needs to be done, and I think we're slowly recognizing that and trying to create positive action on that front. I wanted to talk a little bit about just subjects generally. Air quality, air quality is directly tied to human health. Our region has, I think as a kid, we were known for having the Tacoma aroma, which was a smell. And when I started at the county, we had the worst wood smoke problem in the country. And it was, basically we had about 30,000 uncertified wood stoves in Pierce County and Tacoma. And every time it got cold out, people started burning wood, and it was creating a really big health crisis for people, both adults, kids, anyone with asthma. And eventually the EPA forced us to work on cleaning that up. And so that was one of the things I worked on. We've removed about 5,500 uncertified wood stoves. And now our air is much cleaner. We still have wood smoke issues in the winter. The rest of the year, we get a lot of wind and rain. Rain obviously cleans up our air. Wind moves it around. When we have problems here is when we have inversions. And an inversion is kind of like this picture of Mount Rainier. It's cold, it's clear, there's no rain, and there's no wind. On those days, that's when we start to potentially violate the Clean Air Act. So I just want to make sure people understand that clean air, the cleaner the air, the longer people live. And in your own home, usually indoor air quality is about twice as polluted as outdoor air quality. So considering like a HEPA filter, especially in kids' rooms, I think is something to consider. And there are lots of kind of DIY stuff where you attach a furnace filter to a fan. All that sort of stuff is a good way to clean up the air around you. Energy, just a little more clarification here. We have Tacoma Public Utilities primarily has hydropower. Hydropower is a very low carbon, almost 100% low carbon energy source. There's a lot of conversation about removing dams, and I think that makes good sense in some cases. But I think we need to be careful that the rest of the country is trying to get to clean energy. We have it. If we remove clean energy, it's going to be replaced with natural gas and coal. And in the short term, that is not a winning formula. It's not, I'd argue it's not even what's best for salmon. I think salmon, we do need to look at removing dams whenever possible, and especially where there's no active hydropower. But in the short term, I think climate change is a bigger threat to salmon and to orcas than the dams even. And so we'll have to remove the dams, but it's going to have to be over the course of decades and where it makes sense to do that. Happy to talk more about that. Food, obviously what you eat matters for your health primarily, but some food is much more carbon intensive. I have a picture of a cow, so I'm being pretty obvious here. But I often get people who say, "Well, I can't afford an electric car or solar panels." That's fine. I'm not a big person in sort of guilting people around their greenhouse gas emissions because everyone has different circumstances. But one thing that is true is that your diet is an effectable and affordable way to reduce your carbon footprint. You can make a big difference by eating less meat. It's also better for your health. That part is pretty much well documented. So something to consider. It's a very important thing that people can do if they want to do it. Let's talk a little bit about purchasing. I work in the solid waste industry. That's the garbage industry for those who don't follow it. It's really hard to solve the pollution problem at the end of life. Most of our greenhouse gas emissions are created when things are created and not at the end of life. I can't recycle it and make it all better. So the reality is we want people to ultimately buy less stuff. And that is, I think, a huge portion of that sort of pie chart of our greenhouse gas emissions that isn't on there is all the stuff we buy that happens outside of Pierce County. So just to be clear, I think there's a really great opportunity to be really more intentional about what you buy, and also a recognition that like this electric bike, for instance, some purchases can actually lower your carbon footprint. And so if you're someone who can't get home and back without a car, maybe an electric bike is something to consider. Okay, it's not going to be effective for everyone, but it is something to consider. So a little bit there. Recycling and waste. We've added a new R, which is refuse. Refuse, reuse, reduce, recycle, and follow your recycling guide. Honestly, we have a lot of people who are wish cycling or throwing things in the recycling that aren't recyclable, and everything on the left you can recycle, everything on the right either it needs to go to the garbage or the drop-off facilities. I would just mention to people, there's been a long, we love to recycle in the Pacific Northwest, and recycling is great. Recycling is not going to solve climate change. It was number, I think, 55 out of the top 100 things to do for carbon drawdown. So let's follow our guidelines. Let's recycle. But I think we also need to ask ourselves when we purchase stuff, is it recyclable? One, and two, do we need to purchase it in the first place? So anyway, we really appreciate people following this kind of guide here. The other important thing is not to throw things in the garbage that are recyclable. And that may be even the bigger issue, is we have about 20%, between 20 and 40% of stuff that's going to the landfill could have been recycled. And so we need to focus on both levels of contamination, if that makes sense. So transportation, the cheapest way to get somewhere is likely the lowest greenhouse gas way. So obviously walking, that's the ideal scenario, but because of our land use, it's really not available to everyone. Second best would probably be taking public transportation, using your Orca card if you got one of those. But electric cars are like the transformative solution, but they're not ideal. The reason they're not ideal is because it's going to take a lot of resources to get everyone an electric car. So in the short term, we do need to electrify our transportation, but we also have to recognize that it's not available to everyone, and that you have to have a place to plug that car in, right? And so it's going to be a solution for people who have to have a car. But if we're really serious about greenhouse gas reduction, we need to make cities and counties where people can live without a car. And that's the long-term solution. Electric cars are a great midterm solution. They're also very affordable in terms of the cost of every day using them. They usually are a little bit more expensive to purchase, but you're going to save money every day driving it. I've had, I think, 4 electric cars that cost about $20 a month to charge them, which is a significant reduction over gas. So last couple of things here. Water quality, as you all know, everything that goes on the ground, it ultimately really ends up in our rivers, lakes, and eventually Puget Sound. And one of the maybe the better arguments for electric cars is that they don't have oil. They don't drip oil, they don't leak oil, you don't have to get an oil change. I literally haven't been to the dealership since I purchased my car, and I purchased my car about 4 years ago. So other than changing out tires, which is a whole nother issue, you're going to have less maintenance, and there's going to be less things that end up in Puget Sound. So final thoughts. On a positive note, we have all the technology we need to minimize climate change, and they're already cost effective. I think our biggest challenge is the race against what I would call the race against fossil fuel companies. That business, whether it be Chevron or Exxon or any of those that were on that list earlier, those businesses are not going to go away willingly. And so this is really a huge, I think, challenge for humanity, is how do we find a way to slowly shut those businesses down? And also, how do we give the people who work in that industry a chance to transition to new jobs in the clean energy world? So that's a huge challenge for us. Obviously, I talked about this briefly, but density is a climate solution. People who live in cities like this, where transit is an option, generally have at least a 50% lower greenhouse gas emissions per person than people who live somewhere far away that doesn't have access to transportation, public transportation. So wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Obviously, we need to vote for candidates that act on climate change. And I think that kind of goes without saying. Look at where you invest or spend your money. And if it's companies that are making climate change worse, maybe don't invest your money with those groups. And last thing I'm going to just mention here is that I think adults need to grow up and start acting like kids. One of the frustrations I have is that we've got 5, 7, 10, 16-year-olds out there realizing how serious of an issue this is. And a lot of us adults sit around twiddling our thumbs, not trying to solve problems that really affect their future and our future and our current, as it turns out. So with that, I'd love to take questions.
Thank you, Ryan. That was wonderful. We do have some questions that have come in. Jean wants to know, does Puget Sound Energy have any plans for renewable natural gas?
Yeah, it's a good question. They do. I think they're working on a renewable natural gas plan. Just from what I've seen, if you got all of the renewable natural gas that would be available from sewer treatment plants, landfills, it would only make up about 5% of all the natural gas we use. So it's I'm not going to diminish it. It's something we've certainly looked at the landfill and at our sewer treatment plant, but there isn't enough renewable natural gas to actually take the place of all the natural gas. It would just sort of lower it by a few percent is how I would look at that.
Gotcha. Kind of a follow-up question. You mentioned methane being something of particular concern because of its lifespan and so on. I was wondering about of the percentages for Pierce County, how much of our greenhouse gas footprint is due to methane versus CO2?
You know, I'd have to get back to you on that, but it is, I believe, in that 2015 Puget Sound Clean Air Agency inventory. The thing about methane is it's directly tied to sort of natural gas. And there are a few facilities that I'm aware of, like our landfill, where we're at the 3 and 4th landfill, street landfill in Graham, we're capturing about 50% of the methane coming off the landfill is getting turned back into electricity. So that's mostly a good news story. The other place is our sewer treatment plant out at Chambers Creek. There's a big opportunity there to capture renewable natural gas that we're working on. You do see the flare. I had a picture of a flare. That's a picture in Port of Tacoma. There are a couple of facilities that are flaring quite often down there, and so it's not the Olympic flame. It's a flare of natural gas. Anyway, so that there is a real opportunity. I think that's where the president is focused, because getting at methane usually doesn't cost that much, and it's super important and effective.
Cool, thank you. Olivia wants to know, any plans to increase public transportation options into downtown Tacoma around, especially a plug for us, UW Tacoma area. Currently, very few southbound Sounder trains, and I know a bunch of our students can't get very easily from the Puyallup area into here, and so it ends up being that almost a big chunk of our students and staff actually have to drive into campus. So is there any sort of look at more sort of the needs of things, especially for students coming into downtown?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that's happening is the bus rapid transit line is getting expanded, and so that there are exciting things happening. I think in our climate. So obviously Pierce Transit is the transit agency that you have Pierce Transit and you have Sound Transit. And Sound Transit works in the 4 counties. Pierce Transit works in most of Pierce County, not all. But they are definitely working on bus rapid transit to get people through streetlights faster than cars can. They're also in our plan. We have we're going to make an effort to look at sort of that last mile issue, which is you can get close to home or you can get close to work, but you can't get all the way there. And one of the, I think, challenges we have is a lot of times we can get people to the Tacoma Dome, but then we can't quite get them. You know, if you have to take 2 or 3 different levels of transit just to get somewhere, most folks are going to ultimately, unfortunately, decide just to drive because they got a lot of things to do in their life. So I do think there's going to be improvement. I know that there are probably people on this call who could answer it better than me, but certainly a lot of, I think the big realization is that if people can live without a car, they have an extra $5,000 to $9,000 a year to spend on other things. And that's where density comes in, is if you have people living close together on transit lines, it really makes a difference. But, Pierce County has struggled traditionally providing enough transit options. And because our land use is so spread out, it hasn't always been a convenient way to get places.
Thank you. Let's see. Crystal says, continuing to support and encouraging teleworking for jobs where that makes sense is another great way to reduce vehicle use, transit, traffic congestion, and lower greenhouse gases. I hope teleworking will be part of the solution. Is that something that Pierce County is advocating for, talking about?
So we probably the top thing I heard from Pierce County employees for 10 years was, why can't we just work from home? And COVID happened, and it wasn't you can work from home, it was you must work from home. And so we went from roughly 2% of people working from home to 45% overnight. And one thing I'm real excited about, the number one sort of greenhouse gas emission for Pierce County government is our employees driving to work and back. So I think we have a real strong commitment from our facilities folks, from our executive, and from the council to maybe 45% isn't the right number, but it's closer to 45% than 2%. And so we want to, where it makes sense and where it's viable, focus on continuing to do telework. My only complaint is that my eyeballs are really tired of sitting on Zoom meetings and Teams meetings all day. But it is a nice thing, and I think it's what younger folks are also expecting. I think as they come into the workplace, is at least an option to work from home a portion of the time. So,
gotcha. Thank you. This has actually come up a couple times from different sources, but is there a concern about public safety on public transit? Is there actually a connection between crime and public transit, or is it just do you know anything about that end of things?
I don't think I would. I don't think I'm the expert on that one, so I'm not gonna answer. If anyone on the call wants to, feel free.
Good question. It's come up a couple of times, and I don't think, I've never seen anything like that, but it's obviously coming from somewhere, so I'm not sure where that comes up. This is an interesting question. So we know that population is going up in Pierce County. So how much does that population have an effect on climate change projections? Do you foresee changes as a result of climate migration?
Yeah, I think this is one of the tricky parts, which is we're talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 45%. And yet at the same time, we're probably going to grow by at least 10% in population over that same period of time. And so it is, it's not on a per person basis. We're looking at it as a region. And so as we take new folks, honestly, this is where land use comes into play, is they have to live in cities like Tacoma, Puyallup, Lakewood, if we're going to be able to add people and still reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If they get a single family home out next to a farm or in the forest, that isn't going to work. And I think this is, a critical piece where the planning world and the sustainability world have to come together. Is every time you create a new lot that's out away from transit, it puts more pressure on our roads, but it also creates a greenhouse gas emissions built into that home. Usually you're going to have 2 or 3 cars driving every day from that residence to somewhere else. And, and this is one of the inequitable parts about living in Pierce County is we have over 150,000 people before COVID, at least, who are leaving the county every day to go to work. And because a lot of the jobs are north, we have had to deal with that. And if you've ever been on I-5 going north in the morning, you recognize it, or south in the evening. And we also don't have the light rail and other things that are coming, but we haven't had that to make that more bearable. So yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but it's population growth is a reality. I don't know how much of it's climate related versus Where I think the climate related aspect is, I don't think a lot of climate refugees are coming to Pierce County necessarily, but I think a lot of younger people who have choices are choosing to come to places like this that aren't 110 degrees like Austin is every day. And so they're making a choice about what region they think will be safer in the future. So anyway.
One last question. So you talked about health and climate, and I'm wondering, something that's interesting to me is how is Pierce County planning for increased access to public lands, especially for those super hot days like we saw this past summer? So how do you increase, or how is Pierce County planning to increase access to blue spaces or cooling places that people might use under these certain scenarios?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one I don't have a great answer for. What I would tell you is that like in Portland, where they've been dealing with these hot heat days for the last 20 years, it's a little warmer down there, a little south of us. They have a whole plan for that. At the county, we have an emergency management plan, but I think one of the areas where we could do more is planning for climate resilience situations like these heat waves. And you really do, COVID was sort of a double whammy because I think historically we said to people, go to the mall or go to a movie. Well, obviously not everyone can afford to go to a movie, first of all, but second of all, you got to have public places for people to go and that are air conditioned. And so it's something I think we're definitely gonna work on, but it is new enough that there hasn't been a formal plan that I'm aware of at the county.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Thank you for being with us today, and thanks for giving us our ultimate talk in the climate change series. Thanks everybody for coming. And again, if you're interested in getting access to any of the talks that we've had in this series, just email me and I will be happy to pass those along, and I'll try to send all the last list by some of the listservs as well. So again, also continuing, this particular series isn't continuing, but I run what's called the Grit City Think and Drink public talk series that happens every second Tuesday of the month. And we're looking for talk ideas for 2022. So if you have ideas related to climate change, especially relevant to the region, email me with those ideas and we'll get it on the calendar for next year and continue the conversation. Thank you, Ryan, for being with us. Thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, Jim. Bye.
All right.